Hi, everybody. My name is Pallas Dame, and I am the founder and CEO of the Conscious Leadership Network, as well as an integrative health practitioner, as you can see here. I was supposed to have this masterclass today at 11:30 Mountain Time today, but I've had a few technical difficulties, so I'm here now. Anyway, today I am here to talk about my passion about holistic living, but really how I turned my life around from the disease state that I had with Lyme disease for so long through the practices of holistic living, and really how that applies to this class or this course that I have coming up starting in a week, starting on Monday. So for my journey, I was diagnosed with Lyme disease several years ago, probably 6-7 years ago at this point. But it was something that was left undiagnosed for, probably 6 years before that, at least. And it all started, it started really well over 20 years ago, but the actual true ramifications of it started about 13 years ago when I had my first child. And I went into the hospital that morning super excited about what life was going to hold, what things were going to be like with my husband and a new baby on the way, and how beautiful life was going to be. And so I went into the hospital that day and I had to be induced, and which wasn't fun, but I didn't have a choice at that point. And within an hour of my son being born, I fell into panic and anxiety and depression out of the blue. Like, it came out of the blue. I woke up one way in the morning, and an hour later, I showed up in an entirely different life, a different world. It was the most epic mom fail out of the gates that I couldn't even tell anybody about because it felt so shameful to me. And I thought, if I just push through this, if I just work harder, if I just think my way out of it, I'll get better. Ultimately, this caused me to ultimately be diagnosed with mental illness, several types of mental illness, of ADHD, bipolar, a personality disorder, generalized anxiety, a panic disorder. My life was so hard. It was so difficult. Every day was a 24/7 panic attack, emotional disaster every day. And this just got progressively worse from the day that my son was born. And jump forward about 21 months, and our daughter was born. And when she was born, that night, I stopped being able to sleep entirely. So I had all this other stuff going on that wasn't diagnosed at that point, not postpartum, not anything. And then, boom, I stopped being able to sleep. And what happened was that my endocrine system broke. The endocrine system manages all the hormones in the female and male body. Stopped working. They're responsible for sleep. They're responsible for emotions. They're responsible for blood pressure regulations. They're responsible for everything. And I stopped being able to sleep. And not like, I have a super, super cruddy night's sleep, maybe a week of insomnia. I went over 10 years of not being able to dream, not ever getting into REM state, and having to trick myself that I was resting without the other things going on in my mind. Not being able to sleep is something that would drive anybody mad, anybody crazy, right? But again, at that point, I didn't know what had happened. I just knew I had stopped being able to sleep on top of all this other stuff. And so this went on for years. I just couldn't tell anybody about it because it was so humiliating. Because I was one of these people that historically, if I was stressed out about something, then I would go and get on my bike and ride 30 miles and get super tired and come home like crawling in the front door and go, whew, I worked through it. I unwrapped the mental knots in my brain and I'm good to go now, that kind of thing. And I thought that for these years of these things happening, pushing through these things the way that I had done historically, I'd be able to be okay. And so it was a couple of years after my daughter was born that these things were just getting worse and worse and worse. And at that point, I decided that I was going to join martial arts because I thought, what better way to push through this stuff that apparently I'm just not strong enough to push through on my own, What better way to do this than to join a discipline and a lifestyle that forces discipline? If you adopt the martial arts community, especially the one that I was a part of, you didn't go to have fun. You went to learn the art. You went to learn, to learn the discipline to make it your life, right? You are a role model of that kind of work. And it was tough. It was tough because on top of these other crazy mental challenges that I also had sensory disorders, where if somebody was speaking, so somebody could be speaking and there could be something sizzling on the stove, a breeze could be blowing by, a smell could come by, the cat could rub on my leg, and all at the same time. All of these things had equal importance to me, visually, auditorily, physically. I couldn't delineate between my senses any longer. So it was like being in the middle of a concert, like, I don't know, 10 different like heavy metal concerts all at the same time, equal sensory 24/7. And that was when I decided to go and dive into martial arts. And I did that for nearly 4 years. And I was really close to achieving my black belt. I was teaching and training about, 16, 18 hours a week. Still just trying to push through my stuff, my mental illness, my challenges that I didn't know what was going on, right? And I just couldn't do it. And the day finally came. I was on the floor, at my dojo, and I just couldn't take the input any longer. And at the end of my training session, I went home. I had started a business with my best friend at the time. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't do this any longer. I have to bail out of the business. I'll keep supporting you financially, but I can't guarantee I'm going to show up any longer. I quit martial arts, and I pretty much just wanted to crawl into a hole in my bed crawl under my covers in my bed, pull a pillow over my head, and never come out again. I couldn't deal. And at that time, fortunately, my husband had just seen this presentation from the Amen Clinic in Orange County, California, a brain science clinic. And we watched the video together and decided that I was going to go to this place about 2 weeks later and figure out what had gone wrong with me, because I was normal one day, and then the next day I was no longer myself any longer. And so I ended up spending a weekend there, 4 days, getting brain scans, SPECT scans. These are on the brain. Personality tests, psychological, psychiatric, cognitive tests. I failed everything. Had $15,000 worth of blood tests done. And the things that came back was that I had Lyme disease, and I had this co-infection called Ehrlichia, and which I then later found had embedded in my endocrine system, which was part of the reason that my hormones broke when my daughter was born. Had active mono and brain damage. I had brain scans showing me all this brain damage. And that was just the beginning of me checking in to myself on a level that I had never been aware of at that point in time. Seeing these devastating effects of a disease that came through and ravaged my body, my mind, my nervous system. This stuff attacked the nervous system too, and stole my life entirely. Well, the Amen Clinic itself is an integrative health facility. And what that means is that they have traditional medicine, very traditional, normal allopathic, what the general population knows as traditional medicine, but they integrate it with food and lifestyle and really profound practices and knowledge that Dr. Daniel Amen knows about and brought into his organizations. And with that, what that means is they look at the whole person, what you're eating and how it shows up in the body, in the brain, in the gut, in any mental illness, mental challenges that are going on. Because mental illness, anxiety, depression, bipolar, all these crazy things that I've been talking about are all rooted. I'm not going to say they're all the sole cause, but they're all rooted in gut health and the lack of gut health. Because when we're looking at brain science and we're looking at the things that I was being challenged with my health journey, the brain starts in the head. Like we're taught, here's the brain, like our brain is right here, hit your head, you bruise your brain. Well, the brain, it actually runs from the head down your spinal column, and it connects to this main nerve that runs down called the vagus nerve that goes from the brain through the spinal column down by the heart. It connects to the rib cage, this area, right? It manages the heart. It goes down, connects to the gut, all the way down to the tailbone. And the brain literally runs from the top of the head down to the end of the tailbone. Our brain is our whole torso. It's our whole torso. And so when they're looking at the brain science of what was going wrong with me, they're not just looking at my head brain, looking at my head brain, my heart brain, my gut brain as well. And they were most focused on my gut brain. And the gut test that they gave me came back that I couldn't eat pretty much anything any longer. There was 50, 60 different things on this MRT test that I took that showed me major inflammation reactions to these things that were going on in my body, to the foods that were going in my body. And they were healthy foods. They were things I ate normally, and spices and vegetables and all sorts of stuff. But the disease, the Lyme disease, these different co-infections disrupted the integrity of my body in such a way that everything fell apart. But it started in the gut in so many ways. Right? And so for the Amen Clinic, my first induction into holistic living, which I, at that point, could barely even read. I had so much brain fog. I'm like, you want me to do what? Like, take on a whole new concept about whatever. It was food is medicine. Food is medicine. I'm like, what are you saying? Food is medicine. Well, they started trying to explain how the gut works. And in my brain fogged disease state, I was able to get it to a point. And I got that here's all these foods that I'm supposed to be eating and I can't because they're hurting me. And I left that situation with a book, huge book, that said, this is how you do an elimination diet. Knock yourself out. Go figure that out. I'm like, I came here and I can't even read. So I spent a couple years trying really hard to start navigating this big fear of food that I ended up having. It immediately triggered a really horrible relationship with food, because all of a sudden food meant you're going to hurt me. Whereas prior to that, I could eat whatever I wanted. I didn't have to think about it. Right now, food is not safe. Food is not a part of my ability to thrive. Food is hurting me. Food is damaging my brain. Food is doing all the stuff that I didn't understand. So in this process of not understanding, I had to dive into this huge elimination diet of eggs, no soy, no dairy, as the main staples, no wheat. That's how all elimination diets, almost all of them, I should say, they circle around those areas. And to eliminate those things meant I couldn't eat pretty much anything that I'd ever eaten to date, because I didn't ever have to think about how that was. And it was really, really tough having to navigate an entire different ecosystem of food, of not having any packaged food, no processed, nothing. Like, what do we get in a restaurant? I don't. How do I cook at home? I didn't know how to cook without utilizing all these different things, because they were just the staples, right? But to make a long story short about this big, deep dive into gut health and how that was impacting me, I ended up in this journey of trying to figure out what went wrong with me. What I ended up doing was, several years into it, coming out the other end with the Amen Clinic, and I'm going, well, technically your Lyme disease is gone, but I was still suffering from all of those other things that I had mentioned earlier, of panic disorder, anxiety disorder, huge mood disorders, which would be considered bipolar, anxiety disorder, this personality disorder, all this stuff was still going on. Maybe the Lyme was gone, but I was destroyed. And so in my quest to try to figure out who I was, even at that point, I decided to enroll at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, which is the largest holistic nutrition school in the world. But it was the perfect school for me, because I was able to meet myself where I was at, with pretty much zero knowledge of the connection of food to my body and my body to food, and even to lifestyle. To food. To me, food was the first thing. What integrative nutrition is. Integrative nutrition was ultimately revealed to me over the course of a year. The holistic balances, the balances of food, which is considered a secondary food, not primary. It's considered secondary. The food that we put into our body is the food that we need to physically stay alive. It should be, I learned it should be whole, healthy, predominantly plant-based, from sustainable methods of farming and all sorts of things that mattered to how the body can process these things, how the body can assimilate the nutrients, the things that we require to be healthy, right? But that's secondary food, the food that we put in our mouth. Primary food was a brand new thing to me, because I always thought, well, food should be our main thing we think about. Primary food, as I was taught, were all the things that make up our lives, like career, exercise, relationships, spirituality, as kind of the 4 staple pillars of our lives, of the primary foods, of the things that we experience, the things that we bring into our lives that bring us fulfillment, that bring us connection to ourselves, with one another, to the world, the dynamics that we have, the things, the building blocks of our lives that create who and what we are over time. And with this holistic perspective of food being primary, of food being secondary food, and physical food, and a lifestyle being primary food, it started painting this whole picture about how my life actually worked. And that when this thing is out of balance over here, we'll say my relationships with, a partner, right? And I'm super stressed and I'm unhappy and I'm not eating well, I'm doing whatever, then it shows up in other areas of my life. Like if this thing gets out of whack, then my joy of creativity starts to fail. My joy of creativity starts to fail. My connection with my spirituality starts to decrease. My connection with my spirituality starts to decrease. And my creativity in my relationship, my connection to food becomes imbalanced. When my connection to food becomes imbalanced, then everything that's working inside of me starts to become imbalanced, and not being able to receive things properly, not being able to process things to make me a whole and healthy person. And that when one thing is out of balance, whether it starts with food and it triggers anxiety in the mind, or whether it's out here, anxiety in the world, and it impacts our ability to eat properly, like these things are all a delicate balance, a dance of what we are and who we are and how we show up in the world. And it's like it's a domino effect. When one thing falls, the next one falls, the next falls, the next falls, the next falls. And before we know it, we're just a total disaster, and we don't know why, because we haven't been acutely aware of this dance that we call everyday living, of holistic living, where if this one thing is out of balance, then of course these other things are going to be out of balance, right? So going back to food for me, that was my induction into holistic living. I ultimately learned how to integrate better eating practices into my world. I learned how to cook differently. I learned how to read labels. I learned how to connect to what works for me and what doesn't work for me. What makes me feel good and healthy and energized, and what makes me feel sluggish and bloated and yucky. Like these kinds of more measurable things, which create the bigger picture of anxiety, of inability to sleep, of inability to heal, all sorts of stuff, even showing up in life with depression. Depression is so tied to the food that we eat and our gut health, but it's the most overlooked part of our biological functions by traditional doctors. And as I said earlier, depression was one of the big things I was dealing with, right? And so it took me years on my own to start learning about what was serving me and what wasn't. What do I bring into my life to crowd out the things that aren't working for me? Whether that's food, crowding in the good things, crowding in the healthy things to crowd out the kind of food that I'd always eaten in the past, that was hurting me? What do I crowd in to crowd out? Because if we only crowd out, we leave a place of lack in our lives. There's an emotional connection to eating. There's an emotional connection to the relationships we have. Obviously, there's an emotional connection that we have to anything that we're doing, any vice, anything positive. There's a charge associated with that. Anything that we're ever trying to work on and navigate and maneuver in our lives that we want to change, that we want to tweak, that we want to remove entirely, if we just remove that thing and we don't replace it with something else, then the likelihood of success, of progressing and feeling better and feeling healthy and feeling whole, it starts declining and declining and declining. Because if all we do is put ourselves in a place of lack, we're not balancing out that medicine wheel of life, the circle of life, all the little intricate parts, the dance that I referred to of the things that make us what we are and who we are. So my journey with food took several years. And as I said, it started out with I couldn't eat. I was told I couldn't eat 50 or 60 different things. And several years later, I had healed my gut and I was down to just a handful of little tiny triggers of things that were irrelevant to my life at that point. So I was able to eat again. But it wasn't even that I was just able to eat again. I knew my body. I can tune into my body, can check in with my body. But in this process of learning my body, I learned to check in with the other aspects of my life, of the primary food, of the things that make me happy, the things that bring joy to my life, the things that bring balance to my life, the people that I want to bring into my life, the people that I don't want in my life. Now, I'm not saying I'm perfect at any of this because I'm not, and I'm human, and I'm a work in progress, and I'm always learning, and I'm always growing. But who I am now, and my conscious awareness to what makes me work as a human being, having spiritual experiences in life, or a spiritual being having a human experience, and just a living being showing up on this planet, having the experiences that I have, I'm so much more in tune with me and what I need and establishing a voice around who I am and how I work and how I function than I ever have in my life. And that is by looking at the big picture of what's in balance and what's out of balance. When it comes to relationships and people, because that is the upcoming course that I'm having most specifically, that is such a difficult place for so many people to navigate because we don't have enough introspection of ourselves, enough self-love, enough connection with what truly works for us in the way that I've had to learn about food, as a specific example, to be able to connect with what grounds us to who we are innately in ourselves, what makes us tick. The more off balance and off kilter with who we think we are and our connection to ourselves, the more that's going to show up out in the world in other areas, especially with the people that we allow into our lives. Allow is the word. Allow is a critical piece of our choices of the people that we interact with on a daily basis. Whether they're our families, whether they're our friends, whether they're our peers, our bosses, our employees, our employers, the people that we work with, all of it's a choice. Now, I'm not saying that we can just jump out of a job because there's a total jerk there that's making our life miserable, but it's how do we react to them and what impact do we allow them to have on our lives or not? What people are we naturally attracted to bring into our intimate relationships as a boyfriend, as a girlfriend, as a partner, in whatever capacity that might be, as the friends that we allow into our lives. What we think about, we bring about. If it's unhealthy in here and we're not even aware it's unhealthy in here, we're going to attract that out in the world. We're going to surround ourselves with people who reflect what's going on in our inner world. So if if you're ever wondering why your life is challenged or even why it's so successful, look around you at the people that you surround yourself with. And how are they benefiting you? And how are you benefiting them? Are you helping one another grow and learn and change and transform and become? Or are you shackles around each other's ankles that somebody has thrown into a body of water and you're just drowning together? It's not up to us to have to save everybody. Everybody has the option to make active, conscious choices about how they want to live their life and who they want to allow in and how we want to show up in the world. But those choices are so hard to make if we're not connected with ourselves first. The balance of who we are, the dance of our lives, of the positive and the negative, of the elements of our lives that make us happy or make us miserable, of the things that work for us or that don't. From food to spirituality, to career, to friends, to exercise, to any of it, if we're not consciously aware of what is working for us and what's not, it will show up in our outer world in exactly the same way. Again, what we think about, we bring about. And if we're thinking negative thoughts, if we're thinking about how stuck we are, if we're thinking about the negative gunk, the negative cycles, the negative stories, the negative belief systems, the stuff that goes on in the background that maybe we aren't even acutely aware of, if aware of at all, because we're so used to living in a place of coping. If we're not able to understand and start picking apart who we are, then the people that we allow into our world are most likely going to be energy vampires, are most likely going to be people that are not helping us move forward in our lives because they're in exactly that same stuck place as we are, right? But at some point, somebody, and hopefully it's you, me, like I had to make the active choice to be the person to step up and step out and connect with who I was and what I needed to do for myself in order to move forward in life and become the person I didn't even know that I could become, right? Because I didn't even know where I was starting from, because I was coming from such a place of dis-ease or disease with Lyme disease and all the stuff that I talked about prior to, earlier in this segment, to where I was at that point and where I am now. And being able to be consciously aware, again, of what works for me and what doesn't. What I'm attracting into my life by design, we have to all own it. We create our lives by design, right? When we can check into what are we creating by design, then we're able to start unpacking what do we want to keep and how do we want to move forward? How do we want to transform? How do we want to instill the building blocks to become better, stronger, happier, transformative people in a place of serving, right? And have the conscious awareness, again, of what works for us and what doesn't on all aspects of life, food and lifestyle. Once we can have that kind of discernment, once we can start developing our own language around these things, then we're truly setting forward into our journey of our discovery of what we are. And as we discover more of what we are unpacking what we aren't. And the more we know of what we aren't, the closer we are to who we are. And holistic living, my whole passion for holistic living, my teachings about holistic living, it's all about discernment. And it's all about being able to own our lives, our choices, our thoughts, our actions, how we show up in the world, what we choose to bring in that serves us or doesn't, what we choose to put out into the world that serves others or doesn't, and becoming consciously aware of who and what we are. In my journey from that place of dis-ease, disease, and Lyme disease, all the mental illness, all the stuff, to where I'm at now, I have miraculously unpacked actually, because I've been interviewed several times about my journey. I have unpacked stuff that I had no knowledge that I could ever do, because that disease almost killed me. Just about 2 years ago, I was almost at a point that I wasn't even going to be here any longer. But fully owning the holistic vision and the belief that I have the ability to transform, to move forward, and to heal, that changed my entire life. And that's my story about my disease. And I'm sharing this with you, who you may not be coming from that place of disease. You may be coming from a dysfunctional family, a dysfunctional life, jobs that you feel stuck in, lack of motivation. You don't remember how to play. You can't sleep well. You don't eat right. You have anxiety. But it all goes back to the same thing: what's in balance and what's out of balance in our lives, and becoming consciously aware of who and what we are, so that we can bring the good stuff in to crowd out the bad stuff. That is what it's all about, guys. All right. And I'm just so excited about this. I have so much passion. And so for those of you that, that are interested, I have an upcoming course called Journey into Holistic Health, and it starts the following Monday. And I would love to have you guys join me there. There will be a supportive community. It's an 8-week deep dive into holistic living, about relationships and goals. And it's beautiful. It'll be beautiful and profound and transformational. And it's one module per week, very doable. And I hope to see you guys there. I'll be hosting it out of the Conscious Leadership Network. So community.consciousleadershipnetwork.org. You can also find me at pallasdame.com, PALLASDAME.com. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day. Be sure to like this video, share it out. Come check me out in the Conscious Leadership community. Find me on my website. I'm here. Would love to talk to you, and I hope to see you in my upcoming course. All right. Take care, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon.